Hello everyone, welcome to another anatomy video, and today we'll be discussing all the landmarks located on the eye. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the first term, which is going to be the anterior pole of the eyeball. So the eyeball is more or less shaped like a sphere, and the most anterior portion, right in the center of it, is going to be called the anterior pole of the eyeball. Now on the opposite side of the eyeball is going to be the posterior pole of the eyeball. So let me go ahead and write those terms. So this right here is the anterior pole of the eyeball. And then on the opposite side of the eyeball is going to be the posterior pole of the eyeball. Now, if I was able to connect these two poles with a rod and connect the two of them, it would make an axis. So this is going to be called, when you have an imaginary line connecting the two poles, that imaginary line going right through the two poles is going to be called the optic axis. Since we have a landmark that goes directly through the center of the eyeball, we also have a landmark that goes entirely around the eyeball. So right here on the left, I'll just draw a little sphere, and in this direct center around the eyeball, we're going to have this landmark called the equator of the eyeball. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and move into the next terms. Now I just want to stay on this image just for a quick second here. The first set of landmarks we're going to discuss are part of what's called the fibrous tunic of the eyeball. The eyeball is made up of 3 tunics, and this is the most superficial one. So this is again called the fibrous tunic. And the fibrous tunic is made up of 3 different landmarks. The first one being the sclera. The sclera is this outer portion of the eye, and it's all this white. So whenever you see this white of the eye, you're looking at the sclera. Now, in the center where we see the iris, that colored portion of the eye, there's a transparent portion on the outer side of the eye. So all around here is going to be what's called the cornea. And that is the second landmark found on the fibrous tunic of the eyeball. Again, the cornea is that transparent portion on the outer surface of the eyeball, which you can see directly through, and you can see the colorful iris just posterior to it. Now let's go ahead and move on to the third landmark that I mentioned that's part of the fibrous tunic of the eyeball. Now let me quickly review all the terms for the fibrous tunic of the eyeball again in this new image. Again, the white of the eye is going to be the sclera. And this transparent bulge right here, that's going to be the cornea. Where the sclera and the cornea meet, you have this weird little convergence occurring right here, where it's turning into from sclera to cornea. Now right here, where it kind of goes upward, that is going to be called the limbus of the cornea. Again, this is where the junction is, where the sclera and the cornea meet, and it's typically identified where the cornea starts going upward and the sclera disappears. That's the limbus of the cornea, and those are the 3 parts that make up the fibrous tunic. The next set of landmarks are going to be found underneath the vascular tunic. So we're going to go deeper from the fibrous tunic, which is the most superficial layer. We're going to go down to the vascular tunic. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. That way we can keep track of all the different landmarks. Just deep to the sclera, we have this kind of pink layer directly underneath it, and that's going to be called choroid. And since we're discussing parts of the vascular tunic, we can assume that the choroid is very vascularized, which is true. It has lots of different blood vessels running through this layer. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to our list. Choroid. Perfect. Now the next landmark is located on the anterior portion of the eyeball, and it's this thickened portion right here. So all of this right here that I'm circling in blue, that is part of what's called the ciliary body. Now within the ciliary body, there are a few other landmarks that make it up. There's a few projections coming out of it, folds, and even a muscle. So let's go ahead and learn those. If we look closely, we can see this whitened ridge coming up all the way from the back and towards the lens of the eyeball. You see all these ridges that are kind of highlighted in white? There's lots of them coming up and then go back down. So all this whitened portion, these are called ciliary processes. And again, processes means pokey outy things or something that projects outward. Between these processes, we have what I like to think of as ravines. So we have the peaks, and then between these peaks is a deep ravine located right in between them. So between the peaks, we have our deep ravines. Now these deep portions between the processes, those are called ciliary folds. And now the last landmark that I want to point out that's part of the ciliary body is this smooth muscle tissue located within the ciliary body itself, which is responsible for regulating the shape of the lens. Whether it's relaxing or contracting will change the shape of the lens, which helps us focus on images that are either far away or really close up. This muscle is called the ciliary muscle. Awesome. Let me go ahead and jot down all those terms that we learned that are part of the ciliary body. So this is the second part that makes up the vascular tunic, which is the ciliary body. And the ciliary body is made up of three things. It's made up of the ciliary processes, the ciliary folds, and the ciliary muscle. The next part of the vascular tunic of the eyeball is located right here, and it's the colored portion of the eye. Whether someone has a blue eyes or brown eyes or hazel eyes, that's all determined by the color of the iris. In the center of the iris, we have a hole, and that's the hole we actually look out of. That hole is called the pupil. And those are all the parts that make up the vascular tunic. So let me go ahead and finish my list. We have the choroid and the ciliary body, and then we also have the iris and the pupil. Now the last layer, or more appropriately called the last tunic, because it consists of many different things, is called the internal tunic of the eyeball. And in this tunic, it probably has the most landmarks compared to the other two. The first thing I want to point out is this last and deepest layer. This is going to be called the retina. All of this kind of tannish color you see right here, that is all part of the retina. It's filled with specialized cells, including our rods and cones, which allow us to see. On the retina, we do have a few landmarks. If we look more anteriorly towards the ciliary body, we can see this jagged line right here. This right here is called the ora serrata of the retina. Ora means border, and serrata means serrated, so it's the serrated border of the retina. Now if we look at the opposite side of the eyeball, more posteriorly, we can see this darkened portion right here. This is going to be called the macula lutea of the retina. At the center of the macula lutea of the retina, we have another landmark, this little depression down here. This is called the fovea centralis of the retina. Now this is where we get the most crisp and clear images because it has a large collection of cone cells at the center of it. The last landmark that we have to discuss found on the retina is located right here, and it's a few millimeters away from the macula lutea of the retina. And this right here is actually part of the optic nerve. It's called the disc of the optic nerve. Now here's what they sometimes call the blind spot, because there are no rods or cone cells that allow individuals to see. So this is sometimes called the blind spot. Cool, so I discussed the first part of the internal tunic of the eyeball, which was the retina, and I included all the landmarks associated with the retina. Now let's go ahead and discuss the lens. Right here, this big whopping thing right here, that's the lens. Really easy. And that's the second part of the internal tunic of the eyeball. Now, something important that I want to point out about the lens. It's being suspended in the center of the eye in front of the pupil, well, posterior to the pupil, by specialized little fibers coming off the ciliary processes. You can see here that I'm drawing in purple. These little guys are around the circumference of the lens, and they are called zonular fibers. Now, if you want to talk about them collectively, all the zonular fibers together, then they're going to be called ciliary zonules. Again, if you're only talking about a few or just one, they're called zonular fibers, but collectively they're called ciliary zonules. And they are what supports the lens in its place. They're being anchored down by the ciliary processes, which are right here. This is the very end of a ciliary process, down here as well. And these zonular fibers are coming off the processes. The next portion of the internal tunic of the eyeball are the chambers of the eye. So right here between the iris and the cornea, we have our first chamber. This is called the anterior chamber of the eyeball. Now between the iris and the lens, just posterior, right here, that's going to be called the posterior chamber of the eyeball. Now the fluid within these chambers is a specialized fluid that helps the chambers retain their shape as well as provide nutrients to the cells within this region. This fluid is called aqueous humor. Now if we go down to the corner right here that I'm coloring in blue, right here is where the cornea and the iris kind of meet. Remember, the iris is that colored portion that we can see through the cornea. In this corner, it's called the iridocorneal angle because the iris and the cornea meet at this place. So it's called the iridocorneal angle. In the iridocorneal angle, we have a bunch of different sinuses. They're like little channels at this junction, and it allows the aqueous humor to drain into the vascular system of the vascular tunic. Those little chambers, those little sinuses are called scleral venous sinuses. Again, those are little sinuses or chambers found at the iridocorneal angle. Now the last landmark of the internal tunic of the eyeball is called the vitreous chamber, which is this chamber posterior to the lens. Now the vitreous chamber is actually contained by a specialized membrane called the vitreous body, and all it does is retain all the fluid within the vitreous chamber and allows it to stay within. You're actually born pretty much with the same amount of vitreous humor, which is the fluid within this chamber, as you do as an adult. You can't really replenish vitreous humor. So again, this is a vitreous chamber. The specialized membrane that holds the vitreous humor within it is called the vitreous body. So let me go ahead and write that down. This membrane is called the vitreous body. And the fluid inside the vitreous chamber is called vitreous humor. Those are all the different landmarks found within the internal tunic of the eyeball. So let me go ahead and complete my list. I decided to change to this green color because it's easier to see. Okay, again, so we have the retina, the lens, and the chambers, and all the landmarks found in each of those regions of the internal tunic of the eyeball. And those are all the different landmarks found within the eyeball. In the next video, I'll be discussing all the different muscles that surround the eyeball, as well as the lacrimal apparatus. I hope this video was helpful, and you guys take care.